Developing right now on Morning News Now, worry on Wall Street and renewed fears of a recession over President Trump's tariffs against key U.S. trading partners. Now retaliation from China aimed at hurting American farmers, and a steep surcharge on electricity from Canada, with officials threatening to cut off power completely.
I feel terrible for the American people because it's not the American people who started this trade war. It's one person who's responsible. That's President Trump.
We have team coverage, including what it all means for you. Also this morning, uphill battle. House lawmakers set to vote as soon as today on a pending bill to avert a government shutdown. Why the path to passage is still unclear. Plus, a consequential case going before the Supreme Court involving the Colorado state ban on a controversial practice called conversion therapy. We'll tell you what's at the center of the debate and the impact a ruling would have. And 5 years of COVID. Believe it or not, it's been half a decade since COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic. We'll look at the fight against long COVID and where we stand. Now, 5 years, wow.
It's one of those days where people remember where they were when those declarations came out. Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for being with us. We begin our show this morning with Monday's significant stock market sell-off. This is as uncertainty over President Trump's tariffs continue to spook investors who fear the policy could tip the U.S. economy into a recession. U.S. markets have been on a steady decline over the past few weeks, but on Monday that did intensify. The Dow Jones shed nearly 900 points, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq suffered its worst session since September 2022. The S&P 500 has seen $4 trillion wiped off its market value since it hit an all-time high just on February 19th.
The trade wars are showing no signs of slowing down. The Trump administration is expected to push ahead with 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from around the globe beginning tomorrow. And just yesterday, Canada's Ontario Premier announced a 25% increase on the price of electricity that the province supplies to more than 1 million Americans in 3 states. Speaking on CNBC yesterday, President Trump's top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, downplayed concerns of a recession and blamed recent weak data on the Biden administration.
Near term, we've got a Biden economy that, still most of Biden policies are in place. If you look at the Atlanta Fed GDP now number, it's showing negative first quarter, which is kind of, if you like, a metric of the inheritance of President Biden. This quarter, there are some blips in the data, including the negative GDP now, which are related both to the Biden inheritance and to some, timing effects that are happening ahead of tariffs.
No, this is not the first time members of the Trump administration have criticized the economy. They were left by President Biden. It's worth noting the previous administration did beat GDP estimates and unemployment was almost at historic lows. Here to talk more about all this is NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist and Investopedia's editor-in-chief Caleb Silver. Good morning to both of you. Aaron, let's start with you. The White House released a statement yesterday reacting to all of this market uncertainty. So how are they trying to ease the concerns that are building over trade and the fears of a possible recession?
Well, Joe and Savannah, I think the White House is trying to convey confidence and encourage patience. At the same time, we have heard some mixed messaging on what's going on right now and how people should feel about the economy. We heard President Trump say less than a month ago that the stock market is going to be great. And then this week, you heard him say you can't really watch the stock market. Yesterday, as all of these changes were happening on Wall Street, we didn't really hear from the president. He didn't appear on camera, and in more than 100 social media posts, we didn't see any reference to what was happening on the stock market from him. The White House, though, as you noted, did release a statement late in the day. We'll put it up on the screen. It reads in part, industry leaders have responded to President Trump's America First economic agenda. President Trump delivered historic job, wage, and investment growth in his first term and is set to do so again in his second term. We have heard the president talk about a period of transition. He's made reference to what he called a little disturbance that people would see as his economic policies take hold, as these tariffs he wants to institute or already has instituted take hold around the country. And Joe and Savannah, we've also heard some of his administration officials. The Treasury Secretary, for example, said that there's going to be a detox period as we shift from government spending to more private spending in the economy. And again, they seem to be just encouraging people to have some patience and wait for the Trump plan to really take hold.
Caleb, let's bring you in here. Is all this messaging from the White House enough, do you think, to soothe investor fears? I mean, obviously, we still saw that sell-off yesterday. Should we expect more volatility, do you think, in the days and weeks ahead?
Absolutely, and I don't think it's assuaging anybody's fears. Imagine being a small business owner not knowing how much inventory to order because you don't know what prices are going to be a couple of months out. So a little bit of a transition, a little bit of a rough period, that doesn't actually sit well with people who are just trying to get through. As for investors, this lack of confidence because you can't see the future is what's causing this sell-off, and every day we get more mixed messages on tariffs or whether they're going to escalate or be delayed or pulled back. When you can't see the future as an investor, especially a big one, you sell first and ask questions later. Now, for individual retail investors like us, we're just watching the market go down. It can be very scary. I would expect more volatility in the near term.
Aaron, we mentioned that Canada's Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced those retaliatory price hikes on electricity for the U.S. yesterday. Talk about who's going to be affected by this move, what kind of impact it'll have.
Well, we're talking about three northern states, really, that the Ontario Premier pointed out in his comments about this 25% surcharge that he wants to make sure electricity suppliers in his province apply to electricity that's coming into the United States. I want you to hear some of his remarks about this. This was the Canadians have been very forceful in their statements about this trade war. I think measured but forceful at the same time. Listen to this.
We're moving forward with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports. For the 1.5 million American homes and businesses that Ontario powers, homes and businesses in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. Let me be clear. I will not hesitate to increase this charge. If necessary, if the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely.
Now, the Canadians estimate that this surcharge would result in about $200,000 a day coming into Canada in that 25% surcharge. And Joe and Savannah, that would also mean about a $69 increase in the monthly electric bills for people who receive some of this electricity from Canada. And so there's going to be some pain for folks who are having to see electric bills that go up by that much. And this is on top of the $21 billion that the Canadian federal government has put, the tariff that they have put on goods coming in from the United States, all as a result of tariffs that are already in place on Canada from the U.S. or tariffs that are still to come in later this week and in the early part of April.
Caleb, yesterday we actually also saw two big U.S. banks. This is Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. They lowered their U.S. growth forecasts. Explain exactly what that means, and then tell us how much of that is a response to the policies of the current administration versus general economic conditions.
No, I think it is all as a result of the policies of this administration, and tariffs are inflationary by nature. They know that means it's going to be more expensive for businesses to import goods or export their goods, and they know that means higher prices for consumers. So when they're lowering their growth rates, they're looking at the fact that businesses are going to slow their spending and consumers are going to slow their spending. Don't forget, consumers drive 70% of U.S. gross domestic product. Businesses make up about 25% of that. If there's a pullback on spending, and we've already seen signs of it, that means slower growth and potentially a recession. That's why you're seeing these banks raise the odds of a recession, not to 50, 60, or 70%, but up from 15, 20 to about 30, 40%. Those odds and the drumbeat around recession getting louder and louder as there's more tariff uncertainty.
All right, Caleb, Aaron, thank you both for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it.
Well, House Republicans on Capitol Hill are scrambling to avert a potential government shutdown. Lawmakers have until Friday night to pass a stopgap spending bill, but it remains unclear this morning. It's been 3 days since House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled this funding plan to keep the government going through the end of September.
A key House vote on the spending plan is expected this afternoon. That's after the House Rules Committee advanced the bill to the floor yesterday. It's unclear if either chamber of Congress has enough votes to pass the legislation. With their thin margin in the House, Republicans can only afford one defection. House Speaker Johnson addressed the potential of government shutdown and tried to put pressure on Democrats.
No one wants to shut the government down. If we are governing, doing the responsible thing as Republicans, it's going to be up to Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats to do the right thing. And I don't think they're going to shut the government down.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us with the latest developments on this one. Hey, Julie, good morning. So obviously Friday's deadline will be here very quickly. Before we know it, where do things stand right now in terms of passing the stopgap bill? What can we expect today on the Hill?
Hey, good morning, guys. Well, a question that Speaker Johnson ignored there at the end was mine, which is, do you have all House Republicans that will vote for the continuing resolution, the stopgap funding bill that will fund the government through September? He feels really confident that they do have the votes, even though there are a handful of Republicans in the House, more than he can afford, that right now are undecided. The thing is, though, he has a friend across Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House, President Trump, working the phones. You see what's in that bill on your screen, trying to get those holdouts to vote for this bill. We saw him exude pressure in the House GOP budget resolution that they passed before that for Speaker Johnson to even get the gavel. So there's a good chance in Johnson's eyes that Trump will be able to pressure effectively those remaining holdouts. You see the bill that basically remains spending levels at status quo, meaning Biden era levels. They plus up some defense spending. They cut some money in non-defense discretionary programs. That's something Democrats don't like. But all in all, House conservatives, even the most conservatives, say they're going to be on board for this bill. Today's a really important day. In a couple of hours, I'll be staking out Vice President J.D. Vance, trying to convince those last remaining holdouts on the Hill. And then once the House passes it, it will go to the Senate, where that will exude much more pressure on Senate Democrats.
So, Julie, no surprise Democrats have been critical of the GOP proposal to keep the government funding. Let's talk about what it is they want. Do they feel they have some sort of leverage here, or are they worried they could get blamed if there is a shutdown?
Well, one of the dynamics at play here, Joe, is that the White House is trying to promise these holdouts, look, if you just vote for the stopgap funding bill, a lot of them, remember, never vote for these things. We will promise to claw back future spending. That's scaring Democrats because they really didn't have a seat at the table here at all. And it's by design that Speaker Johnson and Trump really want to put the pressure on Republicans so they don't have to negotiate with the other side. They don't have to negotiate with Democrats. So in the House, Leader Jeffries and House Democrats held a press conference yesterday where they said this.
The House Republican so-called spending bill does nothing to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Quite the opposite. House Democrats will not be complicit in the Republican effort to hurt the American people.
Now, it's one thing to say they're not going to vote for this bill. It's another to make sure all of his members actually do just that. Either way, though, if the House manages to push this bill out of the lower chamber, they're probably going to leave for the week, putting all the pressure on Senate Democrats, 7 of whom are going to have to join all Republicans in supporting this bill, or the government shuts down.
Julie, if the Friday deadline does come and go without a spending bill, what are the immediate impacts here?
Well, immediately Americans won't feel much, right? Social Security, Medicaid payments, those will still all go out. Essential workers will still have to come to work. But it's when that shutdown starts to get longer that Americans can start to feel the effects. They won't be able to go to federal parks. Flying will become a lot more difficult. We're already in a place where so many federal workers are facing layoffs. And it's for that reason why Republicans even feel confident that Democrats, despite the fact that they might not like what the Republicans in control are doing, are probably not going to vote to shut the government down because they're traditionally the party that doesn't like shutdowns. And again, we're at a place right now where Trump doesn't want to shut down. Democrats probably don't want either. But again, the clock is ticking. We're always in this place, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Julie Sirkin, as always, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, Congress works to prevent a government shutdown. President Trump's push to slash the federal workforce is having ripple effects across the U.S. That includes those who help with disaster relief. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez spoke to some FEMA employees who say the cuts have gone too far.
Just days after President Trump placed new limits on Elon Musk's downsizing of the federal bureaucracy, placing cabinet secretaries in charge of layoffs, Musk touting cooperation.
What we do is in consultation with the cabinet secretaries and with their departments.
Did you ever think this would happen?
No.
Air Force veteran and mother of 2, Aileen Renault, had been working at FEMA's Center for Domestic Preparedness here in Anniston, Alabama. She helped train first responders until she was laid off on President's Day.
I thought, well, they're going to take a scalpel to fraud, waste, and abuse, not just hack off the entire limb.
Since Inauguration Day, more than 200 FEMA employees have been cut, just 1% of the 20,000 employees in the FEMA workforce. A government watchdog report in 2022 found the agency was understaffed by 35%. Also among FEMA's layoffs, Marine Corps veteran and father of 3, John Whippler.
I'm sure there are some things that do need to be cut down and removed, but does everything need to be?
Under fire for its response to Hurricane Helene last year, FEMA drew backlash from President Trump.
And FEMA's turned out to be a disaster. And I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away. And we pay directly, we pay a percentage to the state.
But Aline Renault has this message for the president.
Really look at what you're doing to families and individuals across America in small towns, counties, and states that voted for you, and realize that you're not draining the swamp. You are just hurting your everyday blue-collar and white-collar workers that were trying to be public servants and help you make America great again.
Our thanks to Gabe Gutierrez for that report. Now, in addition to FEMA cuts, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that 83% of all foreign aid programs under USAID have now been canceled.
Well, here in New York City, there's growing backlash over the arrest of a pro-Palestinian activist by immigration agents. Protesters rallied yesterday to demand the release of Mahmoud Khalil, a legal green card holder and Columbia University grad who took part in pro-Palestinian demonstrations last spring and was arrested by ICE on Saturday. Well, now a federal court is set to hear a case challenging his arrest and planned deportation tomorrow. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda has the latest.
ICE off our campus now! Anger spilling onto New York City sidewalks after federal immigration agents arrested Mahmoud Khalil, who his lawyer says is a legal permanent resident with a green card. Khalil recently finished a master's at Columbia and helped lead pro-Palestinian protests on campus. His lawyer adding he was detained on Saturday in front of his wife, a U.S. citizen who is 8 months pregnant. The Department of Homeland Security says Khalil led activities aligned to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. A federal judge stepping in, temporarily blocking any effort to remove Khalil from the U.S. Columbia became a flashpoint for protests against Israel last spring. We interviewed Khalil then.
We want a divestment from the Israeli occupation.
In the wake of the nationwide protests, President Trump has vowed to crack down on anti-Semitism on college campuses. He called Khalil's detainment the first arrest of many to come.
Any resident alien who commits a crime is eligible for deportation.
DHS would not comment on what, if any, charges Khalil is facing. The agency's website says he's currently detained in Louisiana.
People are being disappeared under our government's watch with no recourse, no charges, and it's a massive escalation that everybody should be concerned about.
According to the Associated Press, Khalil was under investigation by a new committee at Columbia that addresses cases of alleged discrimination. Khalil telling the AP the allegations against him are mostly social media posts that I had nothing to do with. Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
This morning, a new Supreme Court case is moving forward that could have implications for LGBTQ plus people all across the country. Yesterday, the justices agreed to take up a challenge to a Colorado law that bans so-called conversion therapy. This is therapy aimed at young people who are questioning their sexual orientation or gender identity. The practice is highly controversial and unproven. It pushes gay, lesbian, and bisexual minors to change their sexual orientation. Therapy also tries to get trans children to identify as the gender they were assigned at birth. Many leading medical and mental health experts say that conversion therapy is harmful and ineffective.
This challenge to Colorado's law comes after a Christian therapist appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that the ban violates her freedom of speech. Colorado officials say the law is meant to regulate conduct, not speech. Both a federal judge and a Denver-based appeals court ruled in favor of the state. Now, justices are set to hear this case in their next term, which begins in October.
NBC News senior Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley joins us now to break down the case. Legal analyst Angela Sanadella is here to explain its potential impacts. Good morning to both of you. Lawrence, let's start with you. Walk us through the details of this appeal from the Colorado-based therapist. What's the argument state officials are making?
Right. So as you indicated earlier, this is a fight between free speech and conduct. Question is the court's going to be dealing with is like, are these kind of laws, as you said, all over the country, do they regulate speech or do they regulate conduct? And the state obviously is saying this is kind of like the type of rules that they have for all kinds of medical practitioners and therapists, and they have a right to regulate these people, and any sort of imposition on free speech is kind of incidental to the overall focus of the law, which is to protect young people and health and welfare of people in the state. Whereas the therapist here, Kaylee Childs, it's worth noting, is represented by a conservative Christian group called Alliance Defending Freedom, which has had a lot of success bringing cases at the Supreme Court, which has a conservative 6-3 majority, bringing up these kind of free speech claims on behalf of conservative Christians. And they've had, some success, some big cases, including the one you may remember about a web designer who didn't want to work for gay couples who are getting married because she didn't want to design the websites, and she saw that as a free speech violation. So these are the issues that the court's going to be dealing with when it hears these arguments.
Angela, let's bring you in here. What would attorneys for the Colorado therapists have to prove in order to get a ruling in their favor?
Okay, so the context here is that states generally have broad discretion to regulate the medical treatment within the boundaries of their state. So that is the state's main argument here. And it's very important to note, as we did in the lead up here, that this is a treatment that has largely been proven to be harmful, right? Discredited. So the state is saying we have a right to regulate what is harmful medical treatment within our state. So then what her lawyer would have to prove here is that this is not at all about medical conduct. It's purely about speech. And then beyond that, that it is a content-based restriction, that the government is trying to actually restrict what she wants to say and the type of speech that she is trying to say, at which point then it would implicate strict scrutiny, and then that's how the Supreme Court would review it.
So, Lawrence, the Supreme Court has refused on several occasions to take up similar challenges to conversion therapy bans in other states. Many states have banned it. What's the different about this case that makes it so the court actually said, yeah, we'll hear this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, because about just a little over a year ago, the court declined to hear a similar case from Washington state, which meant that that ban remained in effect. And at that time, 3 of the conservative justices objected, saying the court should have taken up the case. And there are 4 votes are needed out of the 9 for the court to take up a case. And so obviously they were a vote short on that occasion. And not a whole lot has changed on the ground since then. But obviously, at least one other justice has now said they're willing to hear the case. We don't know who, because the court didn't say. But when the court actually hears arguments in the case, we'll get a better idea of whether, there's actually a majority that is buying into this free speech argument, or, whether they just felt like they needed to get up and decide this case now because it has been brewing for a while.
We're mentioning how there's laws like this all over the country. It's actually about 20 states with similar laws. What would a ruling here mean for those other states besides Colorado?
Well, it would really reduce a state's ability to regulate what an individual therapist would want or not do with their own patients. So what that means is that all of these other states then would likely have similar challenges, similar lawsuits regarding the constitutionality of their bans. And those then also would be required to make allowances for Christian therapists, or really any therapist in a case like this. But the implications, I think, go even beyond just conversion therapy. It would really go to whether or not states generally have the ability to regulate medical treatment. And if we look at all of the cases right now regarding transgender youth, even cases regarding puberty blockers and hormone treatment, they all intersect at medical treatment and freedom of speech. So the implications would be significant.
More on this definitely later this year. Lawrence and Angela, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Well, there is a new obstacle in the Menendez brothers' fight for freedom this morning. The new Los Angeles district attorney announced yesterday that they should not be eligible for resentencing. He now says there are, quote, legitimate reasons to withdraw the recommendation of the last DA to reduce their prison terms. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz has the details.
I'm the district attorney of Los Angeles.
The Los Angeles district attorney delivering yet another obstacle to the Menendez brothers and their fight for freedom after 30 years behind bars.
They do not meet the standards for resentencing. They do not meet the standards for rehabilitation. They pose an unreasonable risk of danger to the community, and the resentencing should not, therefore, be granted.
DA Nathan Hochman withdrawing his predecessor's recommendation that Eric and Lyle be resentenced, but saying the court process should continue as planned and be left up to a judge.
Our position is that they shouldn't get out of jail.
The brothers, who are currently serving life without parole for the 1989 murders of their parents, Jose and Kitty, argue they acted in self-defense after years of abuse at the hands of their father. But in a scathing 50-minute rebuke and 87-page filing, the DA cast doubt on those claims, saying the brothers have repeatedly lied and changed their story, and that they originally said they acted out of self-defense because they feared their parents were going to kill them.
Do you believe sexual abuse is a factor in them killing their parents?
I believe that they believe that sexual abuse occurred. As their own attorney acknowledged, sexual abuse does not justify killing the abuser.
Outraged Menendez family members who support the brothers ripping into the DA, saying in a statement he has blinders on to the fact that Eric and Lyle were repeatedly abused, feared for their lives, and have atoned for their actions. The DA saying he could change his recommendation if the brothers take full responsibility.
If they go ahead and sincerely and unequivocally, for the first time in 30 years, lay out that they have now lied on their entire defense and finally admit that they killed their parents in cold blood, then that will be a new insight that the court should then consider.
They've showed remarkable rehabilitation.
The brothers' attorney saying despite the DA's position, they're hopeful the judge will be on their side.
Do you still believe that Eric and Lyle will get out of prison?
Do I? Yes, absolutely. The law's going to be followed, and if the law's followed, they should be out.
All right, thanks to Liz Kritz for that report. Well, resentencing is just one of 3 different paths that the Menendez brothers are trying to take to get out of prison. At this point, their most viable option appears to be with the help of Governor Newsom, who has the power to grant them clemency.
Parts of Central Florida are cleaning up this morning after a tornado tore through the Orlando area Monday. You can see the path of debris left by this destructive EF2 tornado. Winds reached 115 miles an hour, ripping roofs off homes, flipping over cars and downing trees. So far, though, there are no reports of any serious injuries.
Which is just amazing when you see some of those visuals. Well, despite that tornado, spring-like temperatures are moving in from the plains to the northeast. Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman is tracking a March warm-up, a welcome March warm-up. Angie, good morning.
You and everyone else agrees, Joe. Good morning, guys. We've got some really nice temperatures, honestly. If you're looking for that springtime weather, it is in place across much of the country, specifically east of the Rockies. We've got a kind of a setup that's leaving us with these conditions. There's a high pressure sitting just offshore for parts of the southeast. That means that we're dragging in all of this really warm kind of tropical air across a good chunk of the country. Again, Rockies to points east. And these aren't just, 5 to 10 degrees warmer than where we should be. We've got spots like parts of the plains and the Midwest that are running more than 25, 30 degrees above normal. And that's going to be kind of what sets the stage for us over the next day or so here. These are the warmest days of the year so far. And we've got another run at some of that here as we get through the afternoon hours today. 66 in New York this afternoon, 70s for Washington, D.C. and Roanoke. We've got high 70s, nearly 80 degrees in St. Louis, running about 25 degrees above normal this afternoon. More as we get into tomorrow, 57 for Rockford and Minneapolis, but we've got the 70s across parts of Illinois. Paducah heads to the mid-70s. So overall, really mild and kind of unseasonably warm as we head into late week. Dallas, Fort Worth, you're going to hit those temperatures into the mid-80s. It's going to feel a little summer-like, honestly. Mid-70s, though, return by Saturday. We've got a bit of a kind of swing of temperatures in Chicago, too. We go from the 50s on Thursday to the mid-70s on Friday to round out our work week. Philadelphia stops at the upper 50s on Thursday, but ends up into the 70s just in time for the weekend. One other note, we do have some fire alerts in place across Texas and New Mexico, some dry conditions, leaving us with the potential for some of these fires to start and spread quickly. Today, that critical risk is focused mainly Roswell to El Paso, including Silver City. We have low humidity levels. We've got some wind. So this is going to be something that we'll watch for through the day today, guys. But otherwise, plenty of sunshine across much of the country and a whole lot of time to enjoy those outdoor activities with these spring-like temperatures.
Dust off the patio furniture, maybe.
I did exactly that.
I love it.
You got it.
Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, TikTok on the clock to find an American buyer with several offers on the table. The latest on who's making a bid to keep the app running.
But up first, we have developing news. Ukraine's president is at a key summit now as tensions grow with the U.S. The latest on peace talks to end the war with Russia when we come back. Welcome back. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is working to repair relations with the Trump administration and negotiate a truce at a key summit in Saudi Arabia today. Ukrainian officials are meeting with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and other U.S. officials, all for the first time since that contentious Oval Office meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky. Well, ahead of these talks, Rubio and Zelensky met separately with the Saudi Crown Prince, who has emerged as a mediator between Russia and Ukraine.
On the battlefield, Ukrainian forces are trying to take the fight inside Russia itself. The Russian military says that air defenses shot down more than 300 Ukrainian drones targeting Moscow, killing at least one person and wounding several others.
NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia with more. Keir, good morning. Let's start with Ukraine's drone strikes on Russia overnight. How damaging was this show of strength? What do we know?
Well, they were clearly impactful. I should just mention that those talks are happening in a neighboring room from here, just over 2 hours now, that they have stopped for lunch, we're told. But yeah, I mean, a dramatic start to the day before the talks even got started with those drone strikes. According to local officials, the largest drone strike against Moscow during this war. The numbers are slowly rising. 3 dead, local officials say 17 injured. They did land in residential areas. There are images of fires above residential blocks there in the Moscow region. So it is definitely going to have had an impact on the Russians. They themselves have been escalating attacks on Ukraine in recent days, including targeting residential areas and Ukrainian cities and fighting really hard in the area of Kursk. We've talked about it yesterday, trying to push Ukrainian forces, the area where Ukrainians hold Russian territory, trying to push them out of that territory. So attacks from both sides, the background to negotiations here. Effectively, the only way the Russians and Ukrainians talk to each other is through war.
Keir, as you've mentioned, these meetings are mostly happening behind closed doors. So what do we know about how the summit is going so far?
Well, Secretary Rubio had a thumbs up for us as he entered the talks. The Ukrainians have described the atmosphere as constructive, and we do have indications, more than indications, of the different sides' positions. So President Zelensky, who met with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince here in Saudi Arabia last night, then posting that conversation included handing back Ukrainian prisoners, including children, that he had a conversation with the Saudis about reconstruction, and also that he talked to the Saudi Crown Prince about security guarantees. That, of course, the vexed issue that inflamed that meeting in the Oval Office more than a week ago now, the damage from which Ukrainians are effectively trying to repair in this meeting. And then Secretary Rubio on the flight over here talking about wanting to understand the positions of the Ukrainians and the Russians, but appearing again to suggest that the Ukrainians will need to give up territory.
Keir, despite Russia being the aggressor in this war, Trump's been laser focused on securing concessions from Ukraine in peace talks. How's that being seen by both sides?
Well, I think the Ukrainians, quite simply, want to get the flow of intelligence back from the US and do not want to be starved of weapons from the US. So that's their primary goal, I would say, here. While it is clear that they are sticking to some of their basic expectations, particularly those security expectations. In terms of the question when it comes to Russia, Russians, interestingly, are again indicating that they are not in a hurry for a ceasefire or for a deal. So the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, saying this morning, addressing Russians, saying some people are putting on rose-coloured glasses rushing to put on rose-coloured glasses about the new relationship between the United States and Russia. He says, though, that Russia will defend its interests.
All right, Keir Simmons, thank you so much.
A collision between an oil tanker and a cargo ship sparked a massive fire off the coast of England yesterday. The cargo ship was carrying containers of cyanide when it hit a U.S. oil tanker in the North Sea. Defense officials say the oil tanker started leaking jet fuel into the ocean, fuel that was intended for the U.S. Navy. NBC's Danielle Hamamdjian has the details.
A disastrous collision off the coast of England, sending smoke billowing into the sky as jet fuel poured into the North Sea.
So Long has collided with tanker Stena Immaculate in the outer anchorage both vessels are abandoning.
The U.S.-flagged Stena Immaculate oil tanker was anchored 15 miles offshore when a cargo ship punctured its hull, releasing highly flammable jet fuel that a U.S. defense official tells NBC News was being carried for the U.S. Navy. The cargo ship, the Solong, had just left Scotland for the Netherlands. Among its cargo, according to Lloyd's list, 15 containers of sodium cyanide, a dangerous compound used in mining and manufacturing. Exposure to it can be fatal. It's not clear if any of it ended up in the water. The Stena crew forced to abandon that hulking tanker about the length of a city block. At least 36 people from both ships were brought to shore, including all Stena crew members, according to the company managing that Stena ship, Crawley. Ernst Russ, owner of the Solong, saying one of their crew members is still missing. Collisions like this are rare. So how, in this day and age, could this happen?
This morning it's been very foggy, so I would imagine that at that time when the accident took place, that there would have been fog.
But even with the fog, navigation technology is designed to avoid situations like this.
Modern ships have anti-collision systems, they have radar and so on.
Ship location data from marine traffic shows the Solong moving ahead as the Stena Immaculate remains anchored.
The Solong should have avoided it, and it would be down to incompetence on behalf of Solong. There is no reason why in the 21st century two ships should collide.
With the crew accounted for, experts hope the pollution can be contained. Downing Street saying the cause of the collision is still becoming clear and an extremely concerning situation. Danielle Hamamjian, NBC News.
Well, we've got a positive update from the Vatican this morning regarding Pope Francis's health.
NBC News reporter Matt Botter joins us from London with that and some other international headlines. Matt, good morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. Encouraging news overnight concerning the Pope's health. Doctors have lifted yesterday's guarded prognosis, saying that he continues to show good progress during his treatment for severe respiratory problems. Changing this prognosis means that doctors no longer see him as an imminent danger. The Vatican says the Pope will remain in Rome's Gemelli Hospital for several more days, noting that doctors remain cautious about his condition. Moving along now to Guatemala, a local volcano known as the Volcano of Fire is erupting. Local authorities have moved to evacuate some 300 families from its vicinity. They've issued a warning to another 30,000 people in the area that could end up being at risk. The eruption began Sunday overnight, and so far no casualties have been reported. The volcano of fire is one of the most active in Central America. It last went off in June 2023. We'll wrap up this hour right here in the UK at the world-famous Crufts Dog Show in Birmingham. You know the one. This is Muccia. She's an Italian Whippet. On Sunday, she became the first ever Italian dog to win the coveted title of Best in Show. She is 4 years old, and she bested more than 18,000 other dogs. The runners-up included Anna, a Jack Russell Terrier, Lisa, a mini Schnauzer, Viking, a Tibetan Mastiff, and this list is actually fairly long, so I'm going to stop it there. But congrats to Muccia. Very good girl.
I just went to a dog show. It's such a funny place.
I think you could do a whole streaming channel of just dog shows, and folks would watch it all day long.
Yeah.
24 hours of programming.
Just keep reading.
The first Italian. Love it. All right. Thanks, Matt. Coming up, it's been 5 years since the beginning of a pandemic that changed the world as we know it.
Yeah, up next, we're going to look back on how COVID-19 reshaped our lives and how far we've come half a decade later. You are watching Morning News Now. Welcome back. So it was 5 years ago today, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic.
On the same day the stock market plunged, President Trump banned travel from Europe, and the NBA suspended its season, all due to the coronavirus. Some are still living with the infection. Actually, nearly 7% of people who contracted the virus have experienced what's called long COVID. That's when someone gets those symptoms for months, sometimes even years. We still don't have an approved treatment for long COVID, or really even a simple way to test for it.
NBC News medical contributor Dr. John Torres joins us now with more on this. Let's start right there with long COVID. What are the symptoms of it? And so many people still dealing with it.
And that part of the problem with long COVID is the symptoms vary person to person, and there's a variety of symptoms. And essentially, it's 3 months after getting COVID. If you still have these symptoms, you can see here, then you probably have long COVID. You want to get checked out. And it could be anything from difficulty breathing, fatigue, migraines, headaches, joint muscle pains. This problem is the symptoms aren't very specific. They're very diffuse symptoms. And so people sometimes sit around for months and months going, something just doesn't feel right. Could this be long COVID? And those are the people that definitely need to get looked into.
We said that as of now, anyway, there's no way that we know to just cure this, but what's the best way to treat it?
So there's no way to cure it. We have no specific treatment, so they treat the symptoms and they look at what's going on. And part of that also has to do with mental health treatment, like as in, let's see if we can get you to live with what you have right now, because we don't know how long you're going to have this going forward. There's a lot of research going on, and that research is hopefully going to be pinpointing some symptoms, but the research honestly has been lacking over the last 5 years because it's a new thing, something we didn't really know about, just trying to catch up to it right now, including the government as well.
So 5 years ago today, we didn't really know what social distancing was. We were debating over whether we were supposed to wear masks, and we were quickly figuring out how to work from home. So as we sit here today, are we better prepared for the next pandemic? What did we learn?
I think we are better prepared, and there are certain things we learned during the pandemic. Remember flattening the curve. Remember that. Remember the Diamond Princess, the cruise ship that had to go port to port, couldn't go anywhere because they didn't know how to handle it. Well, I think we've learned how to handle things, but I know that we found out pandemic after pandemic that our memory is very short, and we're getting into that time period where we're starting to forget those lessons. And so I think the important thing is not just for us, but for the government and civilian entities and everybody to remember that lesson, the lessons we learned, and say, let's go back and make sure that those lessons are beefed up. And sure, do we do everything right? No, we didn't do 100% right. So let's figure out the right things we did. Let's figure out the things we didn't do quite as correctly and make sure moving forward, when this happens again, not if, but when this happens again, we're ready.
Doctor, also, could I ask about vaccines? Two things here. The breakthrough that an mRNA vaccine was and how COVID essentially kind of like sped up the production and the use of a vaccine like that, but also the vaccine skepticism that's sort of kind of taken root here post-COVID.
And unfortunately, those two went hand in hand. We had this vaccine come out. It was amazing how quickly they came out with that vaccine. But when you look at it, it was actually 10 years of research that caught up to the pandemic. And then in the pandemic, it was just that perfect timing of being able to get that vaccine out within that year. But then that skepticism started, and that distrust of the health community, that distrust of the government, that all started. And I think part of that has to do with social media and being able to get that information, the misinformation and disinformation out on social media very quickly. And it's harder to counter that because it's hard to counter a negative, and it's hard as a physician to say, we live in a gray area. They're putting things in black and white areas, and people listen to that. And unfortunately, that's where that misinformation came from. That's an ongoing battle.
It's hard to believe in 2020, all we wanted was a vaccine, and today most people don't get the vaccine. It's kind of mind-blowing.
And what it is people get more scared of the disease than the vaccine. In this case, that's flipped a little bit.
Totally.
All right, Dr. Torres, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Great to have you.
Coming up new this morning, a major airline ending a popular bag policy. Up next, why Southwest's passengers will soon have to pay to check their luggage. And TikTok, time is running out for TikTok to find an American buyer, and several others are on the table.
We'll introduce you to some of the billionaire businessmen making bids next on Morning News Now. We are back with new details about several possible deals in the works to keep TikTok available in the U.S. Right now, the app, it's set to shut down on April 5th if it isn't sold to an American buyer. NBC News correspondent Stephen Romo has more on some of the biggest names vying to take over the app from its Chinese parent company, ByteDance.
The clock is ticking on TikTok, with President Trump's 75-day pause on banning the app set to end within a month. The president seems optimistic, saying he's working with multiple bidders.
Do you think there's going to be a deal on TikTok soon?
There could be. We're dealing with 4 different groups, and a lot of people want it, and it's up to me.
It's not clear exactly who those 4 groups are, but bidders are clamoring for attention. Employer.com CEO Jesse Tinsley, a former firefighter, is leading one high-profile group to buy the social media app. In a recent op-ed for Fox News, Tinsley highlighted how important TikTok is for Main Street, calling it a lifeline for small businesses, adding how it can build a customer base for real people with real dreams building real businesses.
I think American control, whether that's us or another party, I think that's paramount.
Big names like YouTube personality Mr. Beast joining that group bid.
We have an offer ready for you.
They recently said the offer is, quote, north of $30 billion in cash. Another bidder with a vision, real estate billionaire Frank McCourt, leading what he calls the people's bid.
My view is that when ByteDance understands that they can transact without selling the algorithm, I think their view is going to be totally different.
If he's successful, he says TikTok would not use any Chinese technology, instead being run on his nonprofit's platform, allowing users to have more control over their data. Reddit founder Alexis Ohanian has joined that bid. Another offer led by Wyoming wealth management billionaire Reed Rasner, presenting a plan to have U.S. users buy into the platform as founding members.
This is about the American people, and this is about bringing TikTok to America. And I'm going to fight for that day in and day out.
Rasner says his offer is around $47.5 billion and that the Trump administration has reviewed it. But the big question, will TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance be swayed to sell?
Will China agree to sell it?
I think that's obviously something that's out of our hands. We've obviously put together a very, very strong offer.
Tariff tensions also escalating between the Trump administration and the Chinese government. Frank McCourt telling Reuters just last week, ByteDance hasn't retained a banker or even set a valuation. President Trump says he'd be open to the U.S. only owning 50% of TikTok and extending the ban deadline again if needed.
Hopefully China will approve of the deal, but they're going to play a role.
Perhaps acknowledging all the cards China holds as this TikTok tug-of-war drags on.
Our thanks to Stephen Romo for that report. While President Trump said it is his decision who is able to buy TikTok, it isn't clear exactly what that process will look like once a decision is made.
Breaking news from Southwest this morning. That's sure to cause some headaches at the gate, make traveling on the airline a little more expensive. CNBC's Savannah Henao has that and all the money headlines this morning. Savannah, good morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning to you. Yes, so listen to this. Bags no longer fly free on Southwest. The airline announcing it will start charging some customers for checked bags, ending a long-standing free policy as it looks to boost profits. Southwest is currently the only major U.S. carrier allowing passengers to check 2 bags at no cost. Now, under this new policy, loyal customers with the highest status and those who pay the most premium fares will continue to get free checked bags. The changes will take effect May 28th. The billionaires who attended President Trump's inauguration have seen a reversal of fortune since January 20th. Their wealth had been at record highs then, thanks to stock market gains. But since then, 5 of these billionaires have lost a combined $209 billion in wealth. That's according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, as the S&P 500 has dropped more than 6%. Tesla CEO Musk has lost about $150 billion, while Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has seen his wealth decline nearly $30 billion. And Google co-founder Sergey Brin has lost $22 billion. Now, the companies behind the fortunes of the billionaires have shed more than $1 trillion since the inauguration. And President Trump says he'll buy a brand new Tesla to support Elon Musk after shares of the electric car maker had their worst day in more than 4 years. This amid growing backlash to Musk's political influence in Washington. In a post on Truth Social early this morning, the president didn't specify which Tesla model he's looking to buy. Musk responding with a simple thank you on X. Tesla has lost all its gains since Trump won the election in November, guys.
All right, Savannah, thank you so much. Coming up, while most of her classmates were learning just to drive, she was learning to fly. When we come back, we're going to introduce you to one of the nation's youngest black female pilots. You are watching Morning News Now. Finally this hour, most 17-year-olds are busy studying for the SATs or getting their driver's license. How about flying a plane? NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton takes us inside the cockpit with one of the nation's youngest black female pilots.
It's not every day that you see a 17-year-old juggle classes at Spelman College, then go soaring through the clouds. And Kamora Freeland hadn't imagined this life either.
I actually want to be a marine biologist. I never thought about being a pilot.
At 12, her mom had the idea to put her on a wait list for a scholarship private pilot program. At 15, she got in, trading her love of sea animals for the sky. At 17, after 2 years of flights and intense studies, she made history as the youngest licensed pilot in New York State and one of the youngest black female pilots in the country.
What do people say when they find out that you fly? they're always so amazed, like, wow, like, you're so small, you fly.
The training program, United Youth Aviators, introduced her to other Black kids eager to take flight. She found community in an industry where less than 3% of pilots are Black. Did you worry about whether or not you'd fit into this industry?
No, I just knew that I wanted to create change. I knew that I could show other people that you can do this.
So she showed me a bit of what she's learned, demonstrating more mastery of this plane than I had over a car at her age.
I actually got my driver's license 4 days after my private pilot license.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yes.
She's set her sights even higher, planning to finish college in just 3 years and become a commercial pilot. Do you feel like you're making history in that moment?
I don't really think of myself as someone who made history because I feel like what I did, anyone could do it. Not everyone has this opportunity, and I'm so grateful for it. I'm so amazed every time I fly.
She might even open her own aviation school one day. But for now, she's going to enjoy the view. Antonia Hilton, NBC News, Atlanta.
That
Love
is so
that.
cool. I wonder if her classmates are like, hey, can I get a lift?
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Exactly. Yeah, that kind.
All right, that is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Stay with us, though. The news continues right now. Good morning. Thanks so much for kicking off your Tuesday with us. I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, economic panic. Investors on Wall Street bracing for what could be another rocky day of trading. All three of the major markets suffered their worst session of the year so far yesterday amid tariff uncertainty and fears of a looming government shutdown. Now, Canada slapping additional hikes on energy exports to a handful of U.S. states, including New York. Watching your wallet in a moment. Overseas, Russia and Ukraine ratcheting up the violence in both nations' heavily populated capital cities. Kyiv now bracing for those critical face-to-face meetings in Saudi Arabia aimed at mending ties with Washington. But will President Zelensky make any progress toward peace? We've got the latest. Plus, a renewed focus on a possible link between sleep apnea and dementia. We're going to bring you the story of one California woman who says years of poor sleep took a devastating toll. And later in the hour, we are flipping the script with the uncompromising Margaret Cho. She is a groundbreaking creative, best known for her decades-long career in comedy. Now in 2025, she's re-entering the spotlight with her first new music in nearly a decade. It's bringing the fight for LGBTQ+ rights to the mainstream. People are very excited. We're going to have Margaret live in studio. I'm excited to meet her because she's been one of my favorites for decades.
That is so cool and so neat to have new music after so long.
Exactly. All right. We're going to begin this hour with uncertainty over the state of the economy after another down day for the markets.
Monday was the worst day for Wall Street so far this year after a big sell-off from all three major indices. President Trump's actions regarding tariffs against allies and a looming deadline this week to avoid a government shutdown, it's causing anxiety among Americans. NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Hake has the latest from Washington.
It really was a sea of red on Wall Street yesterday as investors grappled with uncertainty around trade and tariffs and the possibility of a recession and sold. But with more tariffs on the way this week and again next month and a looming government shutdown possible for this weekend, certainty will be hard to come by again today on Wall Street and here in Washington. This morning, the White House defending President Trump's tariffs against top trading partners after a rough day on Wall Street Monday, with a market sell-off that left the Dow down nearly 900 points.
March Madness is upon us.
The Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ all suffering their worst session of 2025. This year's gains erased. Wall Street analysts blaming the slide on President Trump's trade war and increasing fears of a possible recession, which the president did not rule out in an interview Sunday.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big.
The White House releasing a statement after the markets closed Monday that read in part, President Trump delivered historic job, wage, and investment growth in his first term and is set to do so again in his second term. His top economic advisor on Monday morning downplaying concerns.
But for sure, this quarter, there are some blips in the data.
One of the stocks suffering most, Elon Musk's Tesla. Musk asked yesterday about managing the president's cost-cutting efforts along with his businesses.
How are you running your other businesses?
With great difficulty.
The billionaire drawing scrutiny, suggesting he may target so-called entitlements, which include programs like Medicare and Social Security.
Most of the federal spending is entitlements. That's like the big one to eliminate.
While the president continues with his on-again, off-again tariffs with more promise tomorrow. China on Monday slapping a 15% tariff on American agricultural products like chicken, wheat, corn, and cotton. And Ontario, Canada's premier, Doug Ford, made good on his promise to hike electric rates 25% for some 1.5 million American customers who rely on Canadian power. Telling me Friday he was prepared to shut the power off entirely if U.S. tariffs escalate.
That's the last thing I want to do. But President Trump is trying to destroy our country.
The president did not appear on camera yesterday, which is quite rare in this new term, but did post more than 100 times on his social media platform. That included firing back at Canada overnight for that electricity surcharge, calling one of our biggest trading partners a tariff abuser, and saying the U.S. would not be, quote, subsidizing Canada any longer. He also claimed the U.S. would get it all back on April 2nd. That's the date in which he's planning so-called reciprocal tariffs to go into effect on imports from around the world.
All right, Garrett, thank you.
Let's keep this conversation going on the markets with NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. He is on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. So, Brian, it's been a bad few weeks for U.S. stocks, culminating in that big sell-off yesterday. How are things shaping up today? Are investors bracing for more volatility in the days and weeks ahead?
Yeah, well, again, just to rehash, I mean, it was just quite simply not a good day on Wall Street yesterday. The worst day for stocks of 2025 when you consider the S&P 500 down 2.7% and the tech-heavy NASDAQ composite down 4% just in one single day. If you zoom out even farther than that, looking at since Trump's first day in office and inauguration, the S&P 500 is down over 6% and the NASDAQ composite is down 11%. Certainly unwelcome news when you consider that at one point in 2025, we were something like 5% higher on the Dow. So we've erased all of those gains and are now in the red. We're looking at the implied market open because, again, it hasn't opened quite yet, but it does seem like there's a suggestion there could be the open of somewhere between 0.4% to 0.5% of a positive open. That would be the first green day in quite a while. We'll have to see if that shakes out once the market opens at 9:30, guys.
Brian, let's talk through the warning signs or just indicators that we have in the economy that are what are raising these fears, causing the sell-off, this concern of a recession.
Yeah, well, again, with the recession word, that is a actually pretty rigidly defined thing. Some people define it as two back-to-back quarters of negative GDP or negative economic growth in this country. But it is actually clearly defined and not official until a group called the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research, actually declares it. They look at a dashboard of other indicators, including, for example, consumer confidence, retail sales. Those are some of the signs in this economy that have been flashing a bit of caution here. When you look at consumer confidence at lows that we haven't seen in over a year, and also on retail sales that have been disappointing as of the most recent readings. So again, these are things that don't necessarily say that we are in a recession right now, because you look at things like the unemployment rate, which we just saw last Friday. We talked about it on the show, 4.1%. That is near multi-decade lows and in line with what we saw in the final few months of the Biden administration. So we are not in a recession right now, but certainly those fears are out there, underscored by the jitters that we've seen on Wall Street as well.
So, Brian, zooming in, we've seen airline stocks tumbling in pre-market trade. That's after Delta delivered a weak earnings report yesterday. Why is the company slashing its earnings expectations, and what is it saying about the current economic climate?
Yeah, I mean, at 4 p.m. yesterday, people thought that the selling on Wall Street was already over. But then we saw the post-market trading in shares of Delta Airlines after the company guided lower on what their earnings expectations were going to look like going forward. And it was interesting, Ed Bastian, the CEO, cited a reduction in consumer and corporate confidence as a reason. Translation, they're worried that consumers just won't be able to put up as much spend on travel. We heard the same type of commentary coming from American Airlines just this morning as they also slashed their guidance. So now there is this concern that the C-suite jitters over what's happening in this economy might be spilling over into Main Street as well. There is this worry that even though we're not in a recession right now, it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy if the American consumer, which accounts for about 70% of U.S. economic activity, decides to pull back their spend like they might do for travel. That could be something that actually does send us into a recession. But again, not the case exactly right now, but certainly a fear out there.
All right, Brian, thank you so much.
Well, U.S. and Ukrainian officials are meeting face-to-face in a key summit in Saudi Arabia today for the first time since that contentious Oval Office meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where the summit is being held, with the very latest on this. Hey, Keir, good morning.
Hey, Savannah. Well, that U.S.-Ukrainian meeting has been underway now for hours. They have had lunch together. Secretary Rubio with a thumbs up as he entered the negotiations. The Ukrainians describing them as constructive. But, you know, Savannah, the reality of war is unrelenting.
A massive drone strike on Moscow this morning, leaving a trail of destruction in residential areas. Ukraine's largest ever on Moscow, local officials say, after escalating Russian attacks inside Ukraine, continuing overnight. War remains the only way Ukraine and the Kremlin talk to each other, even as President Trump pushes for peace. This morning, US and Ukrainian delegations locked in negotiations in Saudi Arabia, including over a possible minerals deal. The Saudi Crown Prince helping mediate, hosting President Zelensky on Monday, and separately Secretary Rubio. In a post overnight, Zelensky saying he discussed the return of children held in Russia and security guarantees, the vexed issue that fueled his fight in the Oval Office.
You're gambling with World War III.
Ukraine trying to repair the damage today, promising a clear vision to end the war with our American partners. Another complication, Elon Musk weighing in again, suggesting an outage on his platform X came from somewhere in Ukraine.
But there was a massive cyber attack to try to bring down the X system with IP addresses originating in the Ukraine area.
On the flight from Washington, Secretary Rubio managing expectations, including Ukraine's potential land concessions.
We have to understand the Ukrainian position and just have a general idea of what concessions they'd be willing to make, because you're not going to get a ceasefire and an end of this war unless both sides make concessions.
While this morning, Russia says separate, intensive bilateral talks are underway with Washington.
And, you know, Savannah, the Russians once again indicating that they are not in a hurry. A spokesman for the Kremlin talking to Russians, saying many people are rushing to put on rose-colored glasses about the relationship between Russia and America, but saying Russia will defend its interests. Savannah.
All right, Keir Simmons, thank you very much.
This morning, supporters of Eric and Lyle Menendez are refusing to give up on efforts to get the brothers released from prison. On Monday, the new L.A. County District Attorney delivered a major blow to those plans, saying he would not recommend their resentencing. The brothers have served more than 30 years behind bars. NBC News correspondent Liz Croyd spoke with the DA about that decision and has the latest.
This morning, a setback for the Menendez brothers' fight for freedom.
Our position is that they shouldn't get out of jail.
Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman withdrawing his predecessor's recommendation that Eric and Lyle should be resentenced and released.
They do not meet the standards for resentencing. They pose an unreasonable risk of danger to the community, and the resentencing should not, therefore, be granted.
The brothers, who are currently serving life without parole for the 1989 murders of their parents, Jose and Kitty, argue they acted in self-defense after years of abuse at the hands of their father, something dramatized in the popular Netflix series about the brothers that's ignited sympathy and renewed interest in the case.
I wish I could take it back.
Now, the DA attacking those claims in a scathing rebuke and 87-page legal filing, saying the brothers have changed their stories several times, including initially saying they acted out of self-defense because they feared their parents were going to kill them.
Do you believe sexual abuse is a factor in them killing their parents?
I believe that they believe that sexual abuse occurred. But even if sexual abuse occurred, as their own attorney acknowledged, sexual abuse does not justify killing the abuser.
The DA adding he'll only reconsider his decision if the brothers apologize for what he says has been a litany of lies.
If they go ahead and sincerely and unequivocally, for the first time in 30 years, lay out that they have now lied on their entire defense and finally admit that they killed their parents in cold blood, then that will be a new insight that the court should then consider.
This morning, family members who support the brothers blasting the DA, saying in a statement he has blinders on to the fact that Eric and Lyle were repeatedly abused, feared for their lives, and have atoned for their actions.
They have apologized. They have shown remorse. They have taken full accountability to the public. He wants them to agree to that his truth, not their truth, not the truth, but his truth, in order for him to support their resentencing.
Our thanks to Liz Kreutz for that report.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos is here with us now for more. Danny, good morning. So, okay, help us understand what this means is next. We'll put a pin in some of the other options for a moment, but when it comes to resentencing here, especially because that apology kind of seems like maybe it leaves the door open?
The door is wide open. And in fact, the DA is giving them a blueprint for getting back in the door to a resentencing. He's essentially saying, look, my predecessor was way too lenient with this. All I'm asking you to do, in order for me to reconsider, and obviously reconsideration is not a promise, but for me to reconsider, just admit to these 16 discrete points or something like that, up to 20 different things that he says they are still lying about and that they haven't taken accountability. Sentencing law has always been about acceptance of responsibility. In my view, this is a reasonable interpretation, especially because he cites other precedent in considering this kind of rehabilitation and acceptance of responsibility.
Okay, so you're the defense attorney here, and the DA is saying, sincerely, unequivocally, you killed your parents in cold blood, come clean. What do you recommend? Is this an easy situation for the Menendez brothers?
Not exactly, because there are other tracks that they're pursuing, one of which, for example, is claiming that newly discovered evidence entitles them to a new trial. So there is a bit of risk in coming forward and saying, hey, everything you're saying, DA, we admit to all of it. So as a defense attorney, I might be a little uncomfortable with that. But at the same time, the DA is essentially renegotiating. He's not slamming the door shut. This seems like a very real path to a resentencing. Now, by the way, will their convictions still stand? Yes. Is this the most appetizing or palatable option for them? Probably not. They would like a new trial and to be exonerated. That is not likely to happen. So the real question is, do you take the lowest risk, best option to get out of prison? What's important to you? Is it getting out of prison or clearing your name? Clearing your name is probably not going to happen. I would recommend do whatever you can to get out of prison. If that means saying, I did everything you said, then consider doing that.
Let's talk about this other option, which is not dealing with the DA. This is the governor and the option here to grant clemency. But what's interesting about that is that he's asking the parole board right now to essentially evaluate if they would be a risk to society should they be out, which is kind of part of what we heard here. What do you think could happen?
This is so interesting because the DA actually referenced the governor's clemency power and discussed for probably 5 to 10 minutes the case of Syrian, in which Governor Newsom looked at somebody who has been in prison for 54 years and decided ultimately, because he did not accept responsibility in the same way that the DA is asking the Menendez brothers to, that his case warranted him remaining incarcerated. Now, that was a very interesting analysis. In general, the governor, and the DA pointed this out, the governor has always had the power to pardon them. And in fact, governors and presidents alike don't even have to go through all the paperwork. In theory, the president or the governor could pardon someone by tweet. They could just send it out into the ether. All of these things like offices of pardon attorneys and applications, those exist as a convenience to the executive, whether it be the governor or the president. They are not required. So the DA correctly pointed out that Governor Newsom could have pardoned them at any time. He could have commuted their sentences. That means shortening their sentence. They're still guilty, but they get out of prison. He could have done that at any time. He could do it today. He could do it tomorrow. He hasn't done so. And I think the DA did that to point out that the DA is not acting rogue here. There are other branches of government that seem to be in agreement with them.
All right. Danny Ceballos, thank you very much. Fascinating conversation.
We're also following some breaking news overnight out of New Jersey. More than a dozen people were hurt after a school bus carrying children crashed on the Garden State Parkway. The bus was heading across state lines to New York last night when it actually flipped over on the highway. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has the latest from North Jersey near the New York border.
The scene of that devastating bus crash has since been cleared, but investigators right now still trying to piece together what caused the school bus to veer off the right side of the highway and then flip over onto its side about 7:30 last night. Police say the 44-year-old driver, Joseph Iskowitz, was carrying mostly younger passengers, one of whom is still fighting for their life.
Overnight, a dramatic scene on a busy highway. A school bus carrying children crashing and flipping over in New Jersey.
Reported school bus overturned.
That bus was on the Garden State Parkway headed toward New York when it crashed, flipping onto its side, coming to rest in a ditch, facing oncoming traffic.
We got one reported victim trapped underneath the bus at this time.
Police saying, quote, the driver sustained moderate injuries. A juvenile passenger sustained serious injuries, and 13 other juveniles sustained minor injuries. Also saying the driver is a 44-year-old man from Lakewood, New Jersey. The mayor tweeting last night, quote, thankfully no fatalities reported. Most serious injury now has a pulse. First responders on the scene, gathering belongings seemingly left behind. This is New Jersey State Police is still investigating the cause of the crash.
According to at least one local report, those on board the school bus belonged to a Jewish group that was celebrating the birth of the grandchild of a rabbi when this devastating scene unfolded. Police at this moment have no further update on the status of that critically injured child here in Montvale. Back to you.
All right, Sam, thank you.
Well, it is starting to feel like spring out there. Let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman is tracking the warm temps on the way and already here in some places. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Indeed, they are already here today, though, going to be some of the warmest temperatures we've seen all year for a lot of spots. So let's get you the lay of the land. Not a whole lot of high records. There are record highs that we're going to see today, but still temperatures quite impressive, running 10, 15, even close to 30 degrees above normal for this time of year. We've got mid 70s for Cincinnati. We've got high 70s for St. Louis today. Even Des Moines, you're at 55 degrees this afternoon. Across much of the southeast, we've still got those 70s in place, and we could see even a couple of 80s out there, specifically across Texas. 80 degrees in Dallas this afternoon. As far north as Boston, 63 degrees, and we've got those low 70s for Washington, D.C. Now, the northeast cools down a little bit for tomorrow, but notice how we keep the warmth essentially from the southeast up through the plains and into the northern plains, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, all included in those warmer than normal temperatures for tomorrow. We've got mid 70s for Kansas City. Little Rock expected to hit 78 degrees, still 80s across a couple of spots in Texas, and even the southeast, upper 70s for Charlotte and Montgomery. It's going to be kind of a mild, spring-like couple of days before we see a couple of spots fluctuating. Now, Boston ends up into those low 40s by Thursday, but you're right back up to the high 50s just in time for the weekend, so you'll enjoy that as you get into your Saturday. We've got the 80s on tap for the weekend in Raleigh, 76 degrees for Saturday in Birmingham, even Chicago. It's kind of a roller coaster ride for you. On Thursday, you're into the 50s, and then you get near 70 by Friday. So we'll still see some of these spots kind of cooling down and then ramping back up. Typical springtime forecast where, we're just kind of all over the place when it comes to temperatures. Here's the deal, though, when it comes to the fire alerts. These have been something we've seen kind of dealing with on and off over the past week or so. We've still got low humidity. We've still got the potential for that really dry vegetation to start and continue and spread a fire. This is going to be focused mainly across parts of New Mexico and Texas through the day today. There is a critical risk for some folks across that region. As we gear up for tomorrow, we're going to look out west because we've got already flood alerts for parts of Southern California, specifically from Santa Barbara down to the border, including, of course, Los Angeles and San Diego. 21 million people under flood alerts. And here's why. We've got this next storm system. This is going to bring some snow to folks in the mountainous regions. They, of course, will be happy with that for those, the ski resorts and such. But it's going to cause difficult travel across that region. And on top of that, we've got the potential to see some of this heavy rain, not just across California, but for parts of the Pacific Northwest as well. This will be something we deal with tomorrow. And again, we could see the potential for some of these flooding concerns, the mudslides, especially near those burn scar areas. So this is something we'll see into your Thursday. A lot of that will work into the Rockies. But between now and then, specifically tomorrow, we'll watch for the potential for some of the flooding centered across Southern California, Los Angeles to Santa Barbara, in that slight risk. Something you'll want to keep in mind here if you're going to be out and about in that area. We could see the potential for up to 4 inches of rain in those coastal slopes. And again, this goes through Thursday. When it comes to the snow, most of that across the Sierra Nevada range, we could potentially pick up another 3 feet. And this, guys, is why I say that the typical spring, because it's like 80 degrees in Texas. They're still getting some snow on the resorts of the mountainous regions of California. So we got,
the skiers are happy.
It all going on.
They get a few more weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Anne. Appreciate it.
Much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now, including a former president of the Philippines arrested this morning by the International Criminal Court. over a brutal years-long war on drugs that some human rights groups estimate killed thousands of Filipinos.
First, after the break, a step toward unity in Syria. Violent and deadly clashes between loyalists to ousted President Bashar al-Assad and new government forces continue to ravage the country. The key deal that is now expected to bring the feuding sides together. Those stories and more next.
We are back with a breakthrough deal between Syria's new government and Kurdish-led forces. Interim President Ahmed al-Shara signed the historic agreement yesterday. The deal pledges to integrate the U.S.-backed militia, which controls the northeastern part of Syria, with the country's new regime by the end of the year. It also recognizes Kurdish rights following decades of conflict under the now deposed dictator Bashar al-Assad.
The agreement comes as Syria's new leader faces growing instability. Fighting yesterday left hundreds of people dead in the capital of Damascus and in Aleppo. It's the first time clashes have broken out in the two major cities since the fall of Assad's regime in December. In recent days, a wave of violence has been sweeping through former Assad strongholds along the Mediterranean coast. Fighting has killed close to 1,300 people, mostly civilians. That's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights.
NBC News International correspondent Matt Bradley joins us from Tel Aviv with the latest on this. Matt, good morning. So what are Syrian officials saying about the efforts to control the situation there this morning?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Well, we heard from Ahmed al-Shara, as you mentioned, the interim president of Syria. He says that he's going to try to create some sort of fact-finding mission or investigators to go onto the northwest part of the country where all of that violence has occurred over the weekend to try to find out who the perpetrators are and to try to bring them to justice. This could become a salve after this weekend of horrific violence that, as you mentioned, spilled into the major cities of Aleppo and Damascus. And this is a situation that really has cast a lot of doubt on the future of Syria as it emerges from nearly 15 years of civil war. He has also come out and said that all of these different communities within Syria need to integrate. They need to get along. This is a man who has been trying to portray to the international community that he is not the jihadist, not the terrorist that he had been designated by countries like the United States and groups like the European Union, that he is, in fact, a reformer, and he is a person who will pursue more liberal policies in Syria. Once he gets that kind of assignation from the West, then they can presumably lift sanctions and try to assist this new Syrian government. But given the violence over the past weekend, much of it done at the hands of his allies and forces underneath Ahmed al-Shara, it's going to be difficult for a lot of countries to avoid continuing to see him as a dangerous jihadist.
Matt, you mentioned an investigation. There are conflicting reports over what triggered these clashes, and there are some disturbing claims about mass revenge killings against the Alawites. That's the religious minority group that the new government says is aligned with Assad. What should we know about this?
That's right. The Assad family are Alawites. They were Alawites for the past, they continue to be. And the Alawites make up about 10% of the population in the northwest corner, right along the Mediterranean coast there, around the areas of Tartus and Latakia. What we saw over the weekend was just horrific videos of security forces sent by the government in Damascus and others, people who it sounds like just wanted to join the party, wanted to join this orgy of killing that was happening there. And they made some of these, mostly Alawites, bark like dogs, crawl through the streets before shooting them dead execution style and taking videos of it and uploading it. So that is something that obviously disturbed many people who are in Syria, people who are ethnic minorities who had been looking with some trepidation toward this new government and how it was going to be behaving towards ethnic and minority groups, despite the positive noises that we've been hearing from Shara and his top lieutenants. But with all of this going on, a lot of people are worried that the Islamist groups who have now taken control of Syria, who are now in charge in this sort of interim capacity, that they won't be kind to the ethnic and religious minorities that really populate this fractured state and are particularly antagonistic against each other after 15 years of civil war.
All right, Matt Bradley, thank you for your reporting.
New this morning, a former president of the Philippines is under arrest and facing allegations of crimes against humanity for mass killings under his presidency.
NBC reporter Matt Bodner joins us from London with the details on that and other international headlines. Hey, Matt, good morning.
Savannah, Joe, good morning. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte was arrested by Philippine authorities this morning in the Manila airport as he was entering the country from Hong Kong. His arrest prompted by a warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. The ICC has been investigating him for tactics considered widely to be brutal in his war against drugs. Based on official police data, more than 6,000 people were killed during this crackdown. Speaking today, Duterte demanded to know which law, if any, he violated. Moving along now to Romania. On Sunday, the Romanian Election Commission rejected the candidacy of Călin Georgescu, a pro-Russian unknown who shockingly came out ahead during an attempt to hold elections in November. That decision in November and Sunday's decision to bar him from running again based on intelligence that Russia was backing him in electoral manipulation efforts. These decisions have not been without controversy, of course. Georgescu is challenging the ruling, and it has sparked clashes between his supporters and police. We'll wrap up this hour in France. Lawmakers have voted 156-2 to ease restrictions that made it too hard to open new bars in old villages. This still needs approval by the French Senate, but if it passes, it will enable potential bar owners serving communities with less than 3,500 people to skip the line for new alcohol licenses. Supporters of the rule change say change is needed to foster social bonding and reverse feelings of isolation. Critics warn it will just fuel more alcoholism. A timeless debate continues.
Okay, I like that. We need to open more bars so we can have better socialization. That's a good argument. I like that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Coming up, can undiagnosed sleep apnea lead to memory problems, even dementia?
After the break, we'll introduce you to one California woman who says years of poor sleep actually took a devastating toll on her life. This is Morning News Now.
Welcome back. Let's talk about something we spend, or at least should spend, about a third of our lifetime doing, something that could help or hurt us. We're talking about getting a good night's sleep, or a lack of getting a good night's sleep. Well, for one California woman, years of poor sleep took a devastating toll. She struggled with memory loss, depression, and a near total breakdown before discovering the real issue, undiagnosed sleep apnea. She's sharing her story with NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky. He joins us now with more on her story. Morgan, good morning.
Yeah, Joe, good morning. And this is such a good reminder for all of us because right now, doctors say there are millions of Americans suffering from sleep apnea who may not even know it. And that was exactly what happened to Karen Wolk, who's finally back at the job she loves and is loving life after suffering for years from symptoms that took a dark turn.
I couldn't figure out how to get out of the parking lot. I would get lost on the freeway and end up in the wrong city.
For Karen Wolk, the symptoms reminding her every day is a blessing. Amid a recovery years in the making. The problem started when she turned 40 and found herself in a high-powered job, but struggling to remember certain words, places, or even simple tasks.
You forgot how to use a can opener.
Yeah.
Frightening?
Very frightening, because I knew very well that I knew how to do it. Just couldn't.
And it wasn't just memory issues. Karen was also feeling depressed. She sought out a psychiatrist who referred her to a neurologist who suggested another doctor and another. No one giving her a clear answer until she took her own daughter to a sleep specialist who decided to give mom an exam, too.
And when they looked at you at the clinic, what'd they physically find?
That I have a small airway and a small jaw and the hallmarks for obstructive sleep apnea. They told me that it looked like I was breathing through a straw.
Sleep apnea, a disorder impacting an estimated 30 million Americans, where breathing stops and starts, limiting oxygen during sleep. Now doctors are sounding the alarm. It's estimated that 80% suffering from sleep apnea are undiagnosed, and there's growing evidence that if left untreated, symptoms such as Karen's memory loss and mental decline can deepen into dementia.
Patients will present with symptoms. Our job is to find the cause.
And too often, lack of sleep is sitting right there out in the open, but nobody asks about it.
Nobody asks about it.
Dr. Omar Nasir is the board-certified sleep specialist who helped Karen towards recovery. He points to new data showing that 30% of people who know they have sleep apnea choose to go untreated. But he says loss of sleep impacts everything in our bodies.
Long list including heart disease, hypertension, heart attack, diabetes, mood disorders.
All of that tied to sleep apnea.
Sleep apnea and sleep-related disorders.
Too often, Nasir says, people treat their symptoms and not the cause, which is why sleep apnea can linger for years. He stresses there are multiple solutions, and CPAP machines, while helping some breathe easier, aren't for everyone. But with studies raising the risk for dementia, especially in women, treatment is critical.
Could you have ever imagined, when you got that diagnosis for sleep apnea, that there would be a through line to dementia?
No, not at all.
For Karen, it took an implant called Inspire Therapy before her mental fog started to clear. The device, implanted like a pacemaker but below the collarbone, sends gentle pulses to muscles in your tongue to make sure airways stay open anytime she falls asleep. Karen says she now gets 8 hours of restful sleep each night, and the rest she is getting has been a game changer for her mental health.
Without treatment for sleep apnea, where are you?
I wouldn't be able to communicate, be able to participate in life. I would just be surviving.
With millions out there potentially suffering just like she did, Karen wants women to know they're not alone and to get help while they still can.
I went from surviving to living. I went from living my life mostly in bed to being able to function out there in the world.
Morgan, we're so glad to hear that Karen is doing better. That statistic you mentioned, startling. 80% of people who have sleep apnea may not even know it. Explain how that's possible.
Yeah, Joe say it starts with symptoms that can be a little vague here. We're talking about a lot more than just snoring, which these symptoms include memory loss, morning headache, also, as Karen mentioned, depression. So if you think you may have it or just want a little peace of mind, they do recommend getting that sleep study done. That's where doctors monitor you while you sleep, but they also perform that throat and mouth exam, and that's exactly how Karen found out that sleep apnea was the cause of this litany of problems that she had suffered from for years. Joe?
Your report will probably encourage a lot of people to get checked. All right, Morgan, thank you so much. Time now for our mental health check-in. First up, we're breaking down the buzzword empath, what it really means, and the emotional toll that it can take. Plus, move over apples. Well, one may keep the doctor away. A new study suggests another fruit might actually help keep depression at bay. Joining us now to discuss the latest mental health headlines is psychotherapist Dr. Robbie Ludwig. Dr. Robbie, good to have you with us. Let's start with a term that has become popular in recent years, empath, short for empathetic. An empath is defined as someone who takes on the feelings of others. And, well, it's great to connect deeply with others. That sounds pretty exhausting. So what's your advice for people who think they fit this description? How can they help without feeling completely drained themselves?
So someone identifies as being an empath, they have to be very careful about who they interact with and how long they interact. They may find themselves attracted to people who have a lot of problems or are very needy and then feel drained and depressed by that. So what they should do is recognize that they are very vulnerable to emotional contagion, where you pick up the emotions of other people, and to set those boundaries so that you don't succumb to other people's depression and anxiety. You take time out for yourself. And I would even suggest that you look for people who can nurture you back, because very often empaths feel that there's an imbalance in their friendships.
Good to have a two-way relationship with folks when it comes to
That's
that
right.
sort of thing. All right, let's look at a phenomenon called the new pet blues. Many new pet owners, of course, expect joy, but sometimes instead they feel overwhelmed, they're anxious, maybe even regretful in those first few weeks after getting a new furry friend. Why does the new pet blues hit some folks so hard? What can people do to push through that adjustment period?
I love this study because it's very similar to parenthood. The imagery around getting a pet is joy, and you are adopting a best friend and unconditional love. But the reality is it's a very big responsibility that can feel overwhelming and produce anxiety. People are not in control of everything when they adopt a new pet. It takes time. So I think it's really important to understand that this can happen to you so that you don't feel as much shame. Remember the positive reasons why you wanted a pet, and then to give yourself time to adjust. It takes time to get to know our adopted little friends, and it's important that people give themselves time to get there.
The pet probably needs to adjust too. All right, well, let's get to this new Harvard study suggests eating an orange a day could lower the risk of depression by 20%. Walk us through what researchers found. I guess this is due to the connection between our gut bacteria and our mood, right?
Yeah, so there is a link between gut health and mental health. And what the study looked at was when people would have an orange a day, it would trigger a gut bacteria, which would influence our neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine, which are mood enhancers. And it seemed to lift people's mood, again, suggesting that there is this connection between what we eat and the impact it has on our gut and mental health. Now, further studies are needed, but it is promising.
Interesting. All right, Dr. Robbie Ludwig, good to have you with us this morning. Some fascinating conversations.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, we're going to head back inside the White House with a closer look at President Trump's right-hand man, billionaire Elon Musk, and his business ties to China, as his role in the administration raises concerns over potential conflicts of interest. Stay with us. That's up next. We're back with a closer look at the business and financial relationship that Elon Musk has with China. Some experts say it presents an unprecedented conflict of interest within the U.S. government. As part of his extensive business in China, Musk has 2 multi-million-dollar factories and the world's largest Tesla store there. CNBC's Eunice Yoon has more from Shanghai, China.
That is Tesla's main factory. It's a $2 billion investment that produces about 1 million cars a year. 1 out of every 2 Teslas in the world are made there.
By last June, the EV maker had 520 stores in the country.
Tesla sold more than 650,000 cars last year, roughly a third of global sales, thanks to stores like the one behind me. The Shanghai store is Tesla's largest in China. It spans 1.5 football fields.
Tesla's latest Model Y, codenamed Juniper, is on display.
As a testament to the importance of the China market, this new Model Y was launched here before the U.S.
To keep his business moving, Tesla founder Elon Musk needs the Chinese government.
Only weeks after Musk started his work with the U.S. government, Tesla opened this new operation in China, a $200 million power pack factory.
Last year, it showcased its Cybertruck humanoid robot. Musk pitched his Cybercabs on a trip where he met the Chinese premier. And to compete with Chinese car makers like this one testing autonomous driving, Tesla rolled out a software update in February, meant to closely mimic its full self-driving features in the U.S.
I'm in a robo-taxi. I'm on a route that's been approved for an initial group of companies to be able to experiment with their self-driving technologies. Tesla isn't one of them.
That's why Musk tries to stay in the Chinese government's good graces. He's opposed U.S. tariffs on Chinese EVs, as he did to CNBC at an event in Paris.
Neither Tesla nor I asked for these tariffs.
Musk has made favorable comments about China's unification with Taiwan.
There's some inevitability to the situation.
A far cry from wielding a chainsaw at the U.S. government. The White House, Doge, and Tesla did not respond to CNBC's request for comment. This Tesla worker, who didn't want to be identified out of fear of reprisal, said with Musk now in U.S. politics, he worries about his own job. As a businessman, he should focus on the business, the worker says. After all, government affairs should be handled by the professionals. Eunice Yoon, CNBC Business News, Shanghai.
If you are an avid Apple customer, get ready for a new look that's coming to all of your favorite products later this year. I hope it's not the plugins. All right, CNBC's Savannah Henao has that and some other money headlines. Savannah, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. All right, listen to what it is. Apple is preparing a major software overhaul for the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac. Now, Bloomberg reports this revamp is due later this year, and it is expected to significantly change the look of the operating systems to make them more consistent. Now, this includes the style of icons, the menus, apps, window, and system buttons. Now, Apple is working to simplify the way users navigate and control their phones, tablets, and computers, betting that will help boost sales. Meanwhile, Volkswagen joining its rivals in giving a subdued forecast for the year ahead as the sector deals with weaker demand and global trade tensions. The world's second largest automaker by sales is trying to produce more affordable electric vehicles to catch up with cheaper Asian models, but that's leading to higher manufacturing costs. VW is heavily exposed to President Trump's tariff plans for Mexico and Canada. Most of the cars it sells in the U.S. are made in Mexico, while it's set to start producing batteries at a factory in Canada. And Lego's bricks keep clicking, with shoppers, the iconic toy maker, reporting strong sales in the past year as consumers snap up its construction sets, and the company takes market share from rivals. Lego has expanded its product range to reach new people and says its new Lego botanical sets, which are flower bouquets and plants made of bricks, have been popular gifts and helped attract more teenage girls and women.
Love to see that. All right, Silvana, Thank you so much. Coming up, we are flipping the script on this Tuesday morning with the one and only Margaret Cho. We are so excited. She's a groundbreaking comedian and activist whose passion for the LGBTQ+ community has made headlines over the years. Now, she's back in the limelight with her first music project in nearly a decade. We're going to chat about all that and so much more right after this. Stay with us. Let's end this hour with our series Flipping the Script, featuring people on air, on stage, and behind the scenes, shining a spotlight on diversity. Enter Margaret Cho. You've probably heard of her. She's a 5-time Grammy and Emmy nominee, a comedian, actor, musician, and activist. Just days ago, Vogue magazine named her one of the greatest female comedians of all time. I concur. She's also one of the faces for GLAAD's latest campaign, Protect This Kid, which flips anti-LGBTQ rhetoric to advocate for queer youth. Now Cho is out with a brand new album, plus a stand-up comedy tour. She is very busy, and yet we are so excited that she made time to join us this morning on set. Margaret Cho, good to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So much to talk about. People know you, of course, for your comedy, but music, I know, is so important for you.
Yes.
And this is your first album in nearly 8 years, and it really pays tribute to some special people in your life. What should we know about it?
Well, I wrote a song about Robin Williams when he passed away, and I put together an outreach for people experiencing homelessness out on the street. So to mimic his work with comic relief that he did in the 1980s to benefit the homeless then. So I was kind of working out my grief and then singing the song out on the street with lots of people giving food and supplies to people out there who are struggling. And so the song is called Funny Man. It's just about him. I feel like we don't talk about him enough. I think because of the uncomfortable circumstances of his passing.
It's a hard conversation, but we need to have it, right?
But it was a beautiful way to write a song about grief. It was like my version of Candle in the Wind, you know, by Elton John. But it was really meaningful. So the album is songs that really mean a lot to me, and I'm so grateful that I got to put it out.
Why is music so important to you? I mean, Lucky Gift, what is it you hope to do with that album?
I want to be a one-hit wonder. That's like my goal.
Really? Why is that? Explain that.
I just love the idea. Like, I love when Eddie Murphy put out Party All the Time. My girl likes to party all the time. I need to have like the one-hit wonder. That would be so exciting.
So we need to make this a hit, and then that's it. You will never have another hit again.
Well, I would take other hits, but it would just be great to have one.
Okay, so we'll start with the one-hit wonder, and then the two-hit wonder, and then we'll go from there.
Perfect.
You're also touring right now. What's it like? Comedy right now.
Yes.
What does it mean to you? What are you feeling from people out there when you're out there performing?
We need it more than ever. You know, we're feeling so much frustration, and we're being really bullied by the richest people in the world. But what we can do is make fun at their expense, because that's the one thing they can't afford, is jokes at their expense. So it's all no holds barred, all crass, all out there, really outrageous. I'm going for it.
What are you feeling from people who are in your audiences right now? Because you have long just been such an advocate for the LGBTQ+ community, which is feeling a lot of fear and anxiety right now, especially the trans community, which is literally losing rights. So what are you feeling from people?
Anger. And, I mean, unadulterated rage. This is just an impossible situation. And it's so upsetting, you know. For the trans community, they are facing a genocide. It is so horrible. And so we have to stand by it, make sure that we stand together in the queer community. We are united on this. It's very, very important.
And what can comedy do in the face of that?
Comedy is resistance. Laughter is resistance. Laughter is hope. It's the unexpected life that you get for taking a breath that you didn't think you were going to take. You know, laughter is that. So it is hope that you'll survive the moment.
You are working on so many projects right now. What else do we need to know about with what you're doing?
I have a movie coming out called I Want Your Sex with Charlie XCX. That's coming out.
What's it like working with Charlie XCX?
I didn't get to work with. I didn't have any scenes with her.
Oh, okay.
But we are in the film together.
Okay, that's the most important.
So I'm still,
thing, right?
I'm still considering that sort of a Brat Summer act.
Exactly.
I'm gonna take Brat Summer into next Brat Summer.
There you go. What else is going on for you right now?
I'm just doing lots of shows. I'm like touring, and you know, for me, it's really special and exciting. You know, this tour celebrates my 42nd year in stand-up comedy, which is a long time.
That is a long time.
Very, very excited.
You've had this prolific career. You once mentioned in an interview, Joan Rivers, who I know is one of your icons, told you, funny girls grow in power and value as you age.
Yes.
Was she right?
She was very right. She's very true. And she, you know, I wish that she was here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that she would have so much to say. I miss her a lot, but I think she'll be proud.
We have a little bit less than a minute here, but I want to talk about what have you seen over the years? Because you've been such a powerful figure when it comes to Asian representation, female representation, and trying to make that better. Is it getting better? What are you seeing? What do we need to work on?
Things are getting a lot better. There's a lot more representation. There's a lot more, we're seeing the world reflected back to us in television and film. And I'm really grateful for that the arts have really sort of caught up. But we need even more. We need even more diversity. You know, it's a very, very important thing.
We only have a few seconds here, but what's your message to young women who are trying to break in right now and they feel this?
We need you.
Yeah.
We need you. We're recruiting. We're recruiting you. We need you out there. We need your voice. We need your strength. We need your power.
All right, Margaret Cho, thank you so much. And her album, Lucky Gift, is available through most streaming apps. Her stand-up tour, Live and Livid, runs through mid-May with stops scheduled all across the country. Check it out. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now, but the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.